A voice hums as the necklace that Aaron chose from the orc's treasure room drops to the floor, and then there's Lulu standing over it, as she claims she senses some type of special energy from it. The question is, how in the world can they use this thing? Wait a minute, our resident mascot thought that maybe if she was in her transformed state, she could work something out. And poof, just like that, Lulu transformed into her humanoid state. She already felt the shift in power. By the way, it's been a hot minute. Did you miss us? Staring down at the necklace, Lulu intends to use all the spells she knows so she can figure out just what in the world this necklace was, and with that, she starts to cook. The beginning looks promising, but 3 hours later, Lulu lies face down on the floor in utter defeat as she fails to work out what the necklace is. She made a note to ask Garuva to teach her about the other elements as well, when suddenly, the door creaked open and Aaron came waltzing in, asking what she was doing. She welcomes him back with trembling hands, assuming that our hero's already done with his training for the day. Later that night, as Aaron lay in bed with Lulu baking biscuits on his chest, our hero called her and asked if she remembered the day they met Ednet. Back then, he recalled how she said she'd offer him the chance to join her army, not the steel inside him, the next time they met. Upon hearing that, Lulu says she remembers it, so Aaron consults his magical friend to see if he's now ready to stand in front of Ednet proudly. Lulu smiled at him, saying that he already knew her answer, and more importantly, she knew Aaron had already decided on their next destination, while our hero smiled back at her in return, confirming what she was thinking. Finally, it's time for a brand new adventure. Contrary to an already decided Aaron who's lying in bed, here we have Ilya still practicing by herself late at night. In her mind, she has no idea what she's doing or if she is doing okay. She knows she doesn't really need to be obsessed with it and that she should forget it all, but in the end, she can't stop thinking about Ednet. Well, it looks like Miss Perfect still hasn't moved on from chasing after Ednet's shadow. We get you, girl. But what's more important for Ilya now is to know what she wants to do because she doesn't even know herself. As if on cue, Aaron suddenly appeared, asking if they could talk for a minute. The two sat by the bleachers, with Ilya the first to speak as she asked how he has been and if training had been going well for him lately. Aaron says it's the same as always, chuckling as he says so, and in this moment, Ilya feels how warm Aaron's energy is. Looking at him like this, she thought about how peaceful her heart is whenever she's with him, making her forget all her worries and problems. Because of that, it makes her wish that she could stay by his side as long as he allows her to. But suddenly, Aaron spoke and pulled Ilya out of her thoughts. Our hero begins by saying there's someone he wants to meet and how he's already thinking of going to where that person is for his next destination. This prompted Ilya to ask who it was, and Aaron said he was referring to Ednet Crescentia. She was the one Aaron wanted to meet. At the sound of her name alone, Ilya's eyes widened in shock. How is it that she was just thinking about Ednet a moment ago, and now Aaron's suddenly talking about her? Insane telepathy. Back to our hero. Aaron continued how he couldn't help but feel jealous when he first met Ednet back then. It was as if she had something that he didn't. Because of that, he wasn't able to control his temper in front of her, and recalling that now made him admit how embarrassing it was, not to mention a show of weakness. But that was then, and this is now. Now, Aaron thinks that he'll be able to stand proudly in front of her, and if he's being honest, he's not sure what changes that would bring to him. He turns to Ilya then and asks her if she wants to come with him, only for Ilya to answer him in silence. In her mind, she finally understood what she'd been doing all along. She'd been avoiding it because she didn't have the confidence to face Ednet. All this time, she'd been running away from Ednet, thinking that she'd crumble in fear once she saw her, but then again, nothing would happen if she didn't face Ednet. And that's all it took for Ilya to say yes to Aaron's proposition. The following day, a carriage stood by with Aaron, and the rest of the gang bid their goodbyes to our hot and cold duo. Judith squishes her face right next to Lulu's, wondering aloud just what else she's going to do now that she won't get to see the adorable kitty anymore, but Lulu assures her that they'll get to see each other soon. Meanwhile, Ilya bids safe travels to Brett. His sentiment, the blue-haired noble, echoed with him as well. Kubaru also says goodbye to Judith, along with Tarakan, while our resident redhead Hafed thanks him for everything he did. But more important than that, Aaron wonders why Judith and Brett are standing so far away from each other. Judith answered and said that everything was cool, nothing happened, all while avoiding eye contact with Brett, who mirrors her actions. With that, the hot and cold duo finally set off into the sunset, with Judith waving goodbye as she told everyone to keep safe. After Lulu said the final goodbye, Aaron asked Ilya if she wanted to continue training, which she said yes to. A moment later, Aaron clashes swords with Karakam while Ilya continues to practice her orc magic. And what do you know? Even Lulu's learning it in her humanoid form, though she's having a hard time controlling the fire element. Fast forward to a few months later. This time, it's Aaron and the remaining gang's turn to say goodbye. Kubaru couldn't believe that they would now be parting ways. And it was Lulu who reminded him to stay safe. The orc elementalist then turns to our hero, feeling strange about how they now have to say goodbye to each other after spending so much time together, with Aaron saying how much he'll miss Kubaru. The latter says he heard about our hero's dream from his father, pushing Aaron to make sure that he'd achieve it. And that's when our hero admitted that he feels scared since he's not confident if he has chosen the right path. But then again, who knows if he'll do it well, right? But Kubaru knows. He's sure that if anyone can do it, it's Aaron. Suddenly, the orc starts shaking as he tells our hero that Aaron has a special power. He has this special strength that makes the things around him shine bright, and that's the power to change those around him. This is why Kubaru knows for sure that Aaron can do it. He can change the world. Kubaru can't help but pour out all his feelings, thanking Aaron for ending his 17-year wandering and enabling him to return home. For that, he considers Aaron to be not only his friend but also his student and teacher. For him, Aaron is already a hero in his eyes. Kubaru's heartfelt message touched our hero because he couldn't reply immediately to what his orc friend said. Wow, what is this? Who's cutting onions right now? With a single tear flowing from his eye. He thanked Kubaru and vowed to keep working hard so that he could also be a hero to everyone and not just to himself. With a determined look, Aaron promises to do his best. With all that said, Ilya asked if Aaron was ready to go, which our hero said he was. And with that, the two swordsmen turned back and left the Orc Kingdom. But if you think we've forgotten the elephant in the room about our brave ship, you're dead wrong. Now, on to our hot and cold duo. Their carriage continued on their journey through the night while the two sat opposite each other inside the coach. There was utter silence as both swordsmen had a tint of blush on their cheeks. Brett kept staring at Judith while the latter had her eyes cast down. Just what is this tension? Brett recalls the day he confessed to Judith, asking her what she thought of him. To get asked like that so suddenly, of course, our Judith turned her back from him, flustered as heck as he told him that she didn't know. Furthermore, she couldn't believe he could ask such a straightforward question like that out of the blue. Brett paled upon hearing her reply, making him scratch his head in frustration as he blamed himself for rushing it. However, Judith told him in a quiet voice that she'd tell him later. So does that mean our boy has a chance? He'd better have. This ship needs to sail. All Brett could think about was this later, she mentioned. So much so that it became a mantra. Back to the present, our boy made a bold move. He stood up and sat next to Judith, although he couldn't bear to look at her. At least not yet. That sudden move left Judith in a panic again, asking him why he sat next to her. And that's when Brett finally looked at her to ask if he wasn't allowed to do so. Being face to face with him like this again, Judith caved in and just told him to do whatever he wanted. I can't believe we get to see Judith acting so meekly in this lifetime. Unfortunately, there's not much development after that because, before you know it, the two reach Kronos Swordsmanship Academy in no time at all. The two walk side by side, with Judith excited since it's been a while since they saw the academy grounds like this. Brett asked if they'd been gone for the past year and a half when suddenly, the ground shook, disorienting the two as Brett asked just what in the world that was. So what was that tremor? Well, it turns out Headmaster Ian has just wrapped up his fight with a certain powerful someone. The older man asked his opponent if they should just wrap it up for the day, adding that even if they continued, he doubted they'd ever get to settle it. The other older man laughed, saying he would have won had they continued fighting. So at this time, Headmaster Ian asks if they should continue. Finally, the identity of his opponent is revealed. It's none other than the Swordmaster Kuhn, who promised Ian that the next time he visits, he'll make sure to crush his fellow old man. The headmaster only laughed as he said that Kuhn would have to be much stronger than he is now if he wanted to make good on his promise. And that's when Brett and Judith showed up, but Brett asking out loud if he was really Kuhn, the strongest swordsman on the continent. At the sound of his voice, Headmaster Ian turned to them, happy and surprised to see that they returned, while the hot and cold duo greeted him back. The older man also noticed immediately that there was something different about Judith. A red aura emitting from her body, as the hot-headed swordsman proudly told her teacher not to get too surprised once he saw what she could do now. Suddenly, Kuhn walks up to her, asking if she's Judith, which the redhead confirms she is. And that's when Kuhn grinned at her and told Judith that he wanted her to become his student. Nani? Sadly, we have to leave that note hanging and focus on other things for the time being, like our newest minor character, Johnson. You see here, our buddy Johnson works as a coachman, and like many others, he could also act as your guide as long as you pay him nicely. You can't ever get too comfortable with just one job in this economy, you know. As nice as this all sounds, being a coachman/tour guide isn't Johnson's real job because he's actually the leader of a group of bandits. In short, Johnson's job as a coachman is just a front, so he could lure unsuspecting people away from town and rob them blind, which is a sure way to earn money. So this is how his scheme works. First, he waits for a rich-looking person to hire him for his services. After this, he makes up an unbelievable excuse to lure them near their hideout, where his men lie in wait so they can start looting them. It's perfect, right? So far, Johnson's plan has never failed. Or maybe his gang's about to experience its first failure from these next customers of his. They rang the bell, asking for a coachman. While Johnson thought they would be his next victims, the bandit leader turned to them with his customer service smile, introducing himself and welcoming them as he eyed the unsuspecting Ilya and Aaron standing before him. Johnson really thought he could rob them blind, but maybe he could. So folks, place your bets. Cut to the next scene. We see a coach riding through the woods with Johnson snickering to himself. He really believed he hit the jackpot with these two. At a glance, he observed that their pair was both well-dressed and had this air of elegance around them. So there was no doubt about it. They were from noble families. Meanwhile, Ilya and Aaron spend their time leisurely talking about Judith and their adventures, not knowing that Johnson's already celebrating in his mind once he and his gang get their hands on the pair's riches. Heck, he even thinks they could party for a good few days with all the loot they could get from these two. A little while later, their carriage stopped in the middle of a clearing as Johnson explained to the pair that they needed to camp out there for the night. Aaron was okay with that, so he proposed to make their fire while Ilya went ahead to fetch their firewood, her hand already at her sword's handle. Johnson couldn't believe her. Was she really going to cut down that chunky tree with her sword? Well, he couldn't let the lady do all that hard work, could he? Johnson told Ilya that it was going to be hard on her to cut the tree down with a sword like that, holding a small axe in his hand as he said so. He was just about to tell her to move aside when Miss Perfect went and did Fruit Ninja on the tree, leaving Johnson with wide eyes and a hanging mouth. She can cut them perfectly, the ideal size for firewood, before turning to ask if Johnson was okay with the thickness. But the bandit leader only paled and barely managed to mumble a yeah when suddenly it was Lulu's turn to show off. Our resident mascot got ready as she announced that it was her turn this time, leaving Johnson appalled that she could talk. Putting her paws forward, Lulu let out a shout, and voila! They have finally had a fire going as Johnson remains speechless. Meanwhile, Lulu's too excited to care, asking Aaron if he saw her use elemental energy, to which our hero replied that what she used was sorcery instead. Johnson stood there motionless, wondering just who the heck these people were. Just wait until he gets a taste of what tomorrow brings. The following day, Aaron warns him to move back since he and Ilya will be practicing their swordsmanship. Did you hear that right? They're going to spar? But more important than that, just where in the world did that gigantic sword come from? Johnson didn't get to ponder any longer because our hero suddenly came at Ilya, the latter ready to fight as well. That's when the bandit leader noticed that their swords were no ordinary ones. They were aura swords. So these two are actually sword masters? Yes, Johnson. They are. And in a split second, the ground shook as the sounds of swords clashing against each other coupled with the two's explosive power rang in the air, with Johnson standing just a few feet away from the danger zone. Suddenly, Lulu started complaining, annoyed at how noisy Aaron and Ilya were waking her up from her nap. The two almost broke the very ground they stood on, and Lulu was complaining about her nap. Unbelievable. Aaron and Ilya paused their spar. The very ground they were standing on was plagued with cracks and craters, while our hero apologized to Lulu. And that's when Johnson fell to his knees, admitting defeat to these two. One wrong move and he might end up on the chopping block. After their sword practice, the group continued with their travels until they finally found themselves standing before a two-story inn. Aaron tells them that they should spend the night, much to Johnson's surprise. He panicked a little as he realized that this was the inn that their gang used as their hideout. The look of distress was evident on his face so much that our hero couldn't help but ask if there was a problem. Johnson quickly regained his composure and offered to check if they had any available room as he urged Aaron to sit back and wait for him. He just turned, thinking that he needed to warn the rest of the gang before they pulled something dumb, when he suddenly heard familiar voices asking Aaron and Ilya what they were doing on their turf. He was too late. Johnson's men crowd over Aaron, trying to intimidate them with their crappy clubs and asking them nicely to share the pair's money with poor folks like them. Suddenly, Johnson's voice rang loud as he appeared in between his startled Ilya and Aaron, telling these thugs to leave his customers alone. He walked straight to one of the thugs, who was one of his own, the latter whispering to ask their leader what he was doing. Instead of answering his question, Johnson bellowed and told them to beat it, but his henchman was confused. What was his boss doing? Out of the blue, Johnson decked the guy full on, which even shocked Aaron, but the bandit leader was committed to giving the best acting performance of his life, glaring at the other man to get lost or else they wanted to end up dead. In a whisper, he finally told the poor dude to leave unless they wanted to see him angry. And that's all it took for the thugs to leave, as Johnson shouted at their retreating backs to never return or else he let them have it. In his mind, he apologized to them, but guys, please know that your boss is doing this for your benefit, okay? As Johnson walked back to our swashbuckling pair, Ilya and Lulu couldn't help but shower him with praise for how he managed to scare those thugs off, while the latter said it was no biggie. Because of his work, Lulu told him that he deserved a tip. Johnson was a bit puzzled, but that emotion went out the window and was replaced by shock when the talking cat gave him a pair of golden mice. Lulu even promised to give him more if he kept up the good work, and that was all the motivation he needed. Suddenly, Johnson went all out with his customer service as he sat Ilya and Aaron at the dining table, full of the most mouth-watering dishes, telling them that he only ordered the best ones, and he couldn't skip out on Lulu either. For our resident mascot, he got the most special salmon steak prepared for her that left our furry friend speechless. Seeing his burst of efforts, Aaron couldn't help but ask their guide if he was overworking himself, but Johnson answered like a cadet, shouting at the top of his lungs how he would continue to serve them to the best of his ability. Well, it's safe to say that he kept his word, because a few days later, Johnson lays exhausted in the bushes, tired as heck, as he said aloud that he can't keep doing this forever. Behind him, though, is the result of his efforts, a sack full of golden mice. Just looking at these shining items, he got a boost, thinking that he only needed to keep this up for a little more before he could give up the bandit life for good. With that, he hauled the sack behind him, energized to head home and make more money, when not a few feet away from him, he saw Aaron and Ilya sitting on a log. Our hero asks her how she's feeling lately, and the latter answers that she's still worried, but she does feel a bit better. Just then, Aaron put his hand on top of hers as he encouraged Ilya that she shouldn't worry too much about things. Boy, you know you're right, because Ilya's attention is all focused on your hand touching hers. Aaron continued that Enid might have been that intimidating presence when they were younger, but he knows for sure that it won't be like that from now on. In fact, he believes that it won't even be a big deal once they meet, to which Ilya asked if he really thought so, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. Meanwhile, Johnson hid behind the bushes and observed the two from his position, grinning to himself because it was just what he thought. Those two just had to be into each other. From the looks of it, things are going pretty well between them, and if he waited a few more minutes, then he may get to see something interesting, right? Johnson's a bit of a depraved soul too, huh? Unfortunately for him, this is Aaron we're talking about. This young man's as thick-headed as they could get, and just to prove it to you, he even stood up from his seat and told Ilya that they should head back to the inn since they're setting off pretty early tomorrow. See, our guy seriously can't read the room. If Ilya is surprised by this, can you imagine Johnson, who immediately sprang from where he was hiding? He couldn't believe that was all there was to it, holding hands, and just when they'd already set the mood too. He got so into his emotions that he got up and lost his balance, falling flat in front of Aaron and Ilya. Our hero asked if he was okay, which the latter said he was, while Ilya walked past them, saying she'd take a stroll. The bandit leader already felt that the mood soured, so he turned to Aaron to ask if he was not going to follow her. And Aaron being Aaron, he said he'll leave Ilya alone with her thoughts for now because he knows she's got a lot on her plate. Hearing him say that left Johnson reeling. This dude couldn't take a hint. The next day, their group stopped by a local inn to spend the night there while Johnson went ahead to make the necessary preparations. As Aaron and Ilya walked past the pub, he overheard a couple of men talking about how amazing that dungeon was going to be, and the other man said that it'd be the greatest one in the last century. But more important than that, the Holy Kingdom was said to join the upcoming expedition. Now that piece of information caught Ilya's attention, just as one of the others asked why the Holy Kingdom was joining. In answer, the first man said it's because this is no ordinary dungeon. Sure, it may be massive, but based on what he heard, the dungeon itself has been around since the time of the Demon Dragon King, which goes way back. With that said, it's believed that the treasure buried in the dungeon is worth a lot, which is why the Kalven kingdom tried to challenge it upon discovering it, but they had to deal with the opposition of the neighboring kingdoms. For better understanding, the dungeon is located in the middle of 3 kingdoms, namely Kalven, Palanque, and Rabat. To prevent conflict among the kingdoms, the Holy Kingdom decided to mediate by sending their knights. Just then, Aaron approached the man to ask a question, wondering which might order the Holy Kingdom had sent. The older man asked him back if he was a swordsman, and when Aaron said he was, the former said he must have heard of the Holy Kingdom's knights, which are the Black Knights led by Enet Crescentia. Upon hearing her name, Aaron glanced at Ilya, who only gave him a small nod. Our hero then asked the older man if mercenaries were allowed to join this dungeon expedition he spoke of. The man eyed Aaron and commented how our hero looked young. Because of that, he couldn't help but ask out of concern if Aaron would be okay, adding that this was a large-scale expedition that they were talking about. It will definitely be a difficult one, and for that, he can't guarantee our hero's safety. In answer to that, Aaron respectfully told the older man that he'd be all right, thanking him for his concern all the same. Now this made the stranger stare at him. He noticed how Aaron's eyes spoke the truth in them, and that he had a soft yet firm air about him. In his mind, the stranger judged our hero to be some naive kid, but upon closer look, he realized that he was wrong. That's our Aaron for you. Y'all can't deny his glow up even from strangers' eyes. But back to the story, the older man told him that if he really wanted to join the expedition, then he should head to Kalven, since the word is out that they're hiring mercenaries to strengthen their forces, which is just the piece of information our hero needed. With that, he thanked the older man with a smile, and that's exactly where they headed next. A few days later, their party reached the city of Kalven, to which Johnson bid his goodbye. Lulu and Aaron did the same, thanking him for his services for the past few days as the older man bid them safe travels. Aaron, Ilya, and Lulu set off in the opposite direction, with their furry friend telling our hero that she was starving, so they decided to get something to eat first. As they continued to retreat, Johnson stared at their backs, realizing how there are actually a lot of powerful people hidden in this world, and if you ever mess around with the wrong ones, there's a strong chance you may end up meeting your maker. And with that, Johnson turned in the opposite direction, thankful for the chance to earn that much gold, as he told himself that he should live a more honest life from now on. And that's the Aaron effect. You guys, people are suddenly turning for the better once he meets them. Meanwhile, somewhere else in the city, a hand angrily slams on the table, cursing at the bastards from Palanque and Rabat. This person throwing a fit is none other than Amira Shelton, the vice captain of the Kalven Knights. At the moment, she's scratching her head in frustration, annoyed at how the jerks from Palanque and Rabat are giving them such a hard time, considering it's a dungeon they discovered in their own land. It's even worse because these neighboring countries sent their top forces: Rabat's court mage, Perry Martins, and Palanque's swordmaster, Sivian Verux. But that's not all. The Holy Kingdom also sent its forces. At this rate, Amira could almost taste the frustration because she knew they wouldn't be able to get any loot. As such, she decided that she needed to recruit mercenaries that could somehow stand up to these forces. As if on cue, a platoon of her men came waltzing in to inform Amira that more volunteer mercenaries interested in joining the expedition had arrived. She momentarily forgot about her annoyance, asking her men how strong these mercenaries were. One of them was about to shakily fill her in, but Amira decided that she'd just see it for herself. This woman's about to get the shock of her life. At the Kalven Kingdom's training ground, Ilya and Aaron were busy sparring when Amira walked in and called their attention. She asked if they were the ones volunteering for the expedition and introduced herself as the vice captain. With her sword drawn, she told both swordsmen in front of her that their test had begun now. Ilya greeted her and was about to introduce herself when the impatient Almira told her to save it for later. They better stop wasting her time and show their skills pronto. Ilya easily agreed, and after taking a deep breath, the former champion got into position, emitting a powerful aura as she did so, leaving Almira surprised as Ilya lunged straight toward her in a split second. Almira barely managed to fend off the attack by breaking Ilya's momentum with a slash, but the latter was quicker. She was already on Almira's side just as the vice captain realized how fast she was. As Almira turned to take a swing at Ilya, the former champion was quick to evade her, leaving the former frustrated because she couldn't keep up with her at all. Once again, she felt Ilya's presence behind her, late to realize the silver-haired swordsman's quick movement, but when Almira turned, Ilya was already gone. Suddenly, Almira felt pressure from her side as there was a loud clash and bright light, with her blade flying straight to the opposite side of the ring. The Kalven Knight's vice captain could only stare at the remaining sword handle on her hand before turning to her opponent and asking who she was and which kingdom she came from. Finally, Ilya introduced herself as a knight from the Aden Kingdom and said that she was from House Ilya. Almira got humbled real quick, but this is exactly what the vice captain wanted in the first place, so she can't really be upset about it. Later that night, back in her office, Almira snickered to herself because her prayers had already been answered. She couldn't believe the Ilya Lindsay had just joined their side, and what's more, someone even better came along. She recalled her conversation back then, asking our hero who he was, and Aaron told her his name and that he came from the Hale Kingdom. This dude was the very same person who beat Ilya to become a swordmaster. With those two on their side, Almira is pretty confident that they now have a fighting chance against the neighboring kingdoms as well as the Black Knights. But, as promising as it sounds, there is but one room for concern. The vice captain couldn't believe a person like Ilya would join a dungeon expedition and assume that the latter must be doing so because of Ignet. Almira worries that if Ilya only joined the expedition because of a personal vendetta against the captain of the Black Knights, then she might affect the expedition negatively. With that in mind, Almira made a mental note to keep an eye on her for the time being. Well, that's a problem for another day. And hey, at least she got new recruits, so now Almira took it easy as she reached for the cat embroidery she'd been doing. She was so engrossed in talking to herself about how the more pressing issue was now resolved that she failed to notice Lulu leaning from the table to get a better view of her work. Finally, our furry friend spoke up and asked Almira what she was doing and told the vice captain to teach her that. This almost made the vice captain jump out of her skin, letting out a shout as she turned panting toward Lulu. She asked the cat, remembering that she was Aaron's cat. But more important than that, the cat could talk. Lulu excitedly introduced herself, and the cat lover in Almira couldn't help it. She asked Lulu if she could pet her, to which our furry friend agreed as long as Almira taught her how to do embroidery. Or is it sewing? Maybe cross-stitch? Who knows? Lulu tells Almira that she likes her because she reminds the cat of a friend of hers, prompting Almira to ask if she looks similar to Lulu's friend. In reply, Lulu said she partly looks like her friend and only when Almira gets. More important than that, Lulu wants to learn what the vice captain was doing. Seeing that she's a cat, Almira couldn't help but point out that Lulu may find it hard to learn since she's a cat, and she has paws instead of hands. But Aaron's furry companion suddenly lit up as she told Almira not to worry about it. Just like that, she transformed into her humanoid form, showing off her hands to Almira as she asked her if she'd be able to work with them. Once again, the vice captain was left reeling in shock after witnessing Lulu's transformation. Even though she's not a magician, Almira knows that what the cat did was some type of powerful magic. In the end, she caved in and taught Lulu how to do embroidery, but not before making the little one promise not to tell other people about this secret hobby of hers because she wants people to think that she's cool and strong. Lucky for her, Lulu is more than willing to keep it a secret, and with that, the group's first night at Kalven wrapped up. Fast forward to a few days later, when Aaron and the rest of the mercenaries went to Rabat territory. As soon as they reached the region, Almira told Aaron that a banquet would be held tomorrow for the full expedition team, so she expected him to attend the event. Our hero easily agreed, and this time Almira turned to Lulu and told her that she should come too, petting the nibbling cat, who also agreed. However, the vice captain requested their furry friend to attend in her humanoid form since she already had a dress prepared for Lulu. After a moment of thinking, Lulu agreed, and with that, Almira left them on their own. Despite being on the road often lately, our hero made a point to keep practicing his meditation. This time, he found a local park where he sat meditating, emitting his golden aura as he did so. In his mind, he recalled how, up until now, the main emotion controlling the flame in his heart was his combative spirit. This combative spirit is quite similar to the anger he felt because he was jealous of Ignet. At the same time, it's also the very same spirit he used to overcome the will of the old man in his dreams, Karen Winker. As much as it has been helpful for Aaron, our hero doesn't want this to be the only thing controlling the flame in his heart anymore. With that in mind, he decided to dive deep and think about the last revelations he had from his past life, from a will that was steeped in regret and sorrow to a positive will directed toward the world. As soon as he thought about this, the flame in Aaron's heart brightened, just as he thought that he would start to move forward in his own way. However, his meditation was cut short as he opened his eyes and cast a side glance to his right. He suddenly spoke aloud and asked how long the figure behind him would keep watching Aaron. The figure was taken aback as he moved forward and revealed himself, asking Aaron when he knew he was being observed. Aaron answered that it's been 20 minutes since then, to which the older man applauded him for having good senses, and here he was doing his best to conceal his presence too. The older man asked Aaron if he was a swordsman or a magician, and our hero simply told him that he was the former. The man moved even closer, commenting that he hadn't seen Aaron before, so he asked which country he was affiliated with. Aaron answers honestly and tells him that he's a mercenary working with the Kalven Knights. At the mention of Kalven, the man didn't seem to bother anymore as he turned his back and bid our hero goodbye, but not before apologizing for disrupting his meditation. As the older man walked away, he thought about how Aaron's senses were so sharp that he was able to detect somebody else's presence despite being in a deep meditative state. It only goes to show that he's no ordinary kid. Because of that, this man thought to himself that he had to recruit our hero to their side during the expedition. Aaron didn't even have to show off his skills this time, and this man already knows that our hero's not to be messed with. Our boy has come so far. At a different accommodation, the man finally reached his quarters, where he was greeted by two men with a bow and called Sir Varius. So this dude's the swordmaster of Palanque? Hot dang. He immediately told his men that there was something he wanted them to do for him. Look into the recruits of Kalven's current expedition party and report it back to him ASAP. Despite the night getting deeper, other people, the Knights of Palanque to be precise, are busy running around to fulfill Sir Varius' request. A little while later, one of his men finally reported what they found about Kalven's expedition party. He thanked the younger man for their hard work and started flipping through the document until something caught his eye. Ilia Lindsay is included in the list. What's a high-profile figure like her doing, joining an expedition like this? Vera thought that there was only one reason why the only daughter of the Lindsay family would participate in a dungeon expedition, and it was all because of Emet Crescentia. Vera was assumed that Ilia was acting out her emotions by joining this expedition, commenting about how she's still a child despite being a sword master. It seems our girl, Ilia, really can't run away from her past, seeing how people are still making assumptions about her. It also made him wonder if the loss she suffered at the Land of Attestment left such an impact on her. But wait, Land of Attestment. Sir Varius immediately continued reading the report upon remembering that the champion who defeated her, there was one of her peers from her swordsmanship academy. From what he heard, the two of them set out to travel together after the competition. So he checked the list again, and what do you know? He was right. Varius knew our hero was no ordinary kid, grinning to himself as he finally knew who he was. He was the new golden-haired swordmaster, Irene Pereira. It looks like our hero's finally getting the recognition he deserves now that we're seeing how his reputation is starting to precede him. As for Veru, it turns out this dungeon expedition is a lot more interesting than he initially thought. The following day, it's the day of the banquet, when people have started arriving at the banquet hall. Apart from the few early birds, Almira walks beside an elderly gentleman with a soft smile who asks her if it is true that they recruited 2 swordmasters for their party. The vice captain said they have, but at the moment, she's more concerned about the Holy Kingdom since they still haven't arrived yet. The older man, who is actually Gregory Griffin, the captain of the Kalven Knights, only hummed, not too bothered by the group's absence. Almira is relentless. She thinks that the Black Knights are showing off their power by not making an effort to be present at the banquet, considering that all the kingdoms are gathering together for the first time. Sir Gregory only chuckled, telling her to take it easy and not to worry too much. After all, their party may have gotten caught up with something that explains their absence. Suddenly, another figure appeared and greeted Sir Gregory, asking if he'd been well. This man is Perry Martins, the court mage of Rabat, whose look has a different meaning compared to what he's saying. Perry suddenly glared at the older man, asking for confirmation if there was any truth behind them rushing to strengthen their forces, and they ended up hiring mercenaries. Emitting a cool aura, the older man didn't back down from his intimidation as Sir Gregory told him that these mercenaries shouldn't worry them at all, as he promised these recruits wouldn't get in the way of the expedition. Suddenly, Verox walked in on them, telling Perry to cut it out as he reminded the former that this event was to celebrate all of them working together in harmony. The mage only scoffed at him, criticizing Verox for pretending to be nice. The former asked if the swordmaster was up to something. However, he never got to hear what Verox said because Sir Gregory suddenly got excited, asking Almira if those people walking over them were the new recruits she was talking about. Upon hearing that, Perry and Verox turned at the same time to see Aaron, Ilia, and a doll like Lulu wearing a poofy dress walking toward them. She may be too cute for her own good looking like that, but there's no denying how intense Lulu is as she was wreaking overwhelming mana all around. Perry couldn't believe what he was seeing. Lulu was emitting so much powerful magic that it was almost akin to an archmage. She also has a pair of wings and horns, so just who is she? And best of all, our humanoid friend is slaying that dress too. Seeing Perry's reaction to Aaron's party, especially Lulu, was pure bliss for Almira. Well, that did the job and shut him up quickly as she snickered behind him. The vice captain knew she made the right decision by stirring things up with Lulu making an appearance like that. The Kalven Knights don't look too weak anymore in their eyes, right? Lulu's cute debut aside, the appearance of the trio was quickly followed by murmurs from the crowd. Their eyes trained on the silver-haired swordsman beside him. Aaron was quick to notice this as the swordsman talked about Ilya, many of them assuming she was there just because of Ignet. The murmurs grew louder, some of them wondering if the only reason she was there was because of how she wanted to avenge her brother, while others laughed at her, thinking how she was so obsessed with it. Our hero glanced at Ilya, hoping that she was okay even after hearing all this, but the former champion had an unreadable expression on her face. Finally, Ilya released a heavy sigh, and they weren't expecting to hear what came out of her mouth next. The silver-haired beauty actually dropped the F-bomb. To say Aaron and Lulu were shocked is an understatement because they couldn't believe Ilya just cursed. She spoke aloud, saying how people couldn't just leave her alone, and she's gotten so sick and tired of it. As if to stress her annoyance, the former champion dropped the F-bomb again, paired with a glare toward those naysayers, while Aaron stood frozen like a statue at what he just witnessed. Finally, Ilya learns how to hit back at her haters. So how exactly did she learn how to curse? Or, more importantly, who taught her that? Let's take it back to a few months ago, when one fine day, Judith commented on how she gets frustrated whenever she sees Ilya. As for the latter, who was minding her own business while sitting prettily like that, Ilya tried to move away from Judith's judging stare. But you know what our red-headed fighter is like. She leaned even closer to Ilya, asking her why she let all the nonsense worry her. Like, who even cares what people say? Judith points out that people like them will always have something to say, regardless of what Ilya does. The silver-haired beauty tried to explain her side, but Judith beat her to the punch, smiling as she told Ilya that she didn't need to impress them. In fact, Ilya might as well curse them straight in the face. Ilya was obviously appalled by this idea. I mean, she was brought up as a noble lady, so just the thought of cursing people was too much for her. Fortunately for her, she's got Judith, who went ahead with the tutorial, telling Ilya to repeat after her. And with that, our favorite redhead got into position as she manspreaded and said the F-bomb in the most annoyed voice. Ilya was left speechless, but Judith was relentless. Now she wanted Ilya to try it too, promising her that it would make her feel better. Ilya could only stare back at her, feeling incredulous at Judith's suggestion, but then the redhead swordsman said something that left an impact on the former. Cussing them out is way better than letting all those negative emotions fester in her heart. Ilya pouted for a bit before she tried to cuss in a small, stuttering voice. Judith suddenly yelled louder at her ear, causing Ilya to finally drop the F-bomb loud and clear. The redhead was proud of her progress and then urged her to do it again. But this time she wants Ilya to say it like she meant it, so that's exactly what Ilya did. Thank the heavens that Judith grew up on the streets. Ilya found someone to let her loose. Now, back to the story. As Ilya walked away, she smiled and muttered how cursing in front of people wasn't so bad after all. Aaron and Lulu still stood frozen in shock until she told them that they should all go sit now, while Sir Gregory chuckled, amused by how lively their party was. Now that's settled, the banquet finally began with the captain of the Kalven Knights kickstarting with a speech. First and foremost, Sir Gregory thanked everyone for joining them today, and as he was about to say something hopeful about the gathering, there was a loud rumble that shook the ground. It continued, causing panic among the guests when suddenly, a portal started to materialize in the middle of the room. Before anyone could react to it, it suddenly grew larger, as everyone could only wait and stare what was to come out of the other end of this portal. Just then, a pair of dainty feet emerged, quickly followed by knights clad in full armor. And seeing them, Almira already knew who they were, the Black Knights of the Holy Kingdom, Arvilius led by Jurog and Anya at the front. Man, it's been so long since these two popped up that I actually forgot about their names. And the very last person to emerge from the portal is none other than the Black Knight's Captain Ignet Crescentia. And that is how you make one heck of an entrance, folks. While everyone was seated in shock by their sudden appearance, Jurog turned to Anya, asking her why she made the portal in the middle of the banquet hall instead of outside. Was she trying to save the sorcery gold she saved up? Hearing that made Anya all defensive as she fumed and explained how she thought the portal was supposed to be outside. On the other hand, Ignet walked straight to Sir Gregory, greeting him with a bow and apologizing for Anya's mistake. She formally apologized to the older man, saying she didn't mean to offend him at all, but Sir Gregory brushed it off in good spirits. The older man laughed, saying he didn't expect to see such a rare spectacle like that. Ednet continued and explained that their party just got out of a mission, which is why everyone was pretty tired, and in line with that, she asked if it was all right with Sir Gregory if they could head to their quarters and rest for a bit first. In reply, the old man was surprised since he didn't know the Black Knights had just come from a mission, so with that, he ushered them straight to their quarters. Suddenly, something, or someone, caught Ednet's eye as she suddenly left Sir Gregory mid-conversation, asking to be excused for a moment, leaving Almira shocked. The vice captain started to worry, thinking that if Ednet continued walking in that direction, then she'd bump into Ilya in no time at all. But we all know that's not who Ednet saw, right? So you could just imagine Almira's shock, as well as that of everybody else, including Ilya, when Ednet walked right in front of Aaron. The Black Knight's captain greeted him, commenting how he's changed a lot since she last saw him, even calling him by his full name, just to show that she remembered him. Meanwhile, our hero remained tight-lipped as he stared back at the formidable force that is Ednet Crescentia. Aaron remained seated as he locked eyes with Ednet, while Almira wondered why the Black Knight's captain walked past Ilya and went to Aaron instead. Meanwhile, Veros was also watching their exchange and noted how Ednet told our hero that he had changed a lot, wondering if the two actually knew each other. Aaron finally stood up and greeted Ednet back, the latter reiterating how our hero changed that quickly. Suddenly, she emitted an intimidating aura, staring hard at Aaron as she asked what happened since she last saw him. The sudden burst of power startled Aaron, and everyone else remained rigid in their seats, feeling the pressure all the way there. Even Sir Gregory commended Ednet for how ferocious her spirit was when he noticed Aaron didn't budge a wink. Ed was impressed to see that he wasn't intimidated at all despite standing face to face with such a force. Looking at him like this, the captain of the Kalven Knights deemed that Aaron was much more impressive than he initially thought. Back to Aaron and Ednet's stare-off. Aaron refused to answer Ednet's question until she finally asked if he was not going to tell her. Since it looks like he's not going to, Ednet powered down and turned away from Aaron's table, but not before telling him that she'll be keeping a closer eye on him from now on. Aaron and Ilya remained standing, with the latter flabbergasted because she couldn't believe Ednet didn't even look at her, while our hero only glanced at her. At the same time, Anya also walked toward their table, but her focus was on Lulu instead. She greets Lulu and asks if it's really her, smiling as she reminds Lulu that she's Anya. She went on to ask how Lulu had been and how she managed to transform like that, but the latter only glared at her in silence. Lulu turned away from Anya, visibly upset, as she told the other girl that she wouldn't be talking to her. Anya was shocked, prompting her to ask Lulu why, and the latter said it was because she and Ednet picked on Aaron back then. Poor Anya tried to defend herself, saying she never did something like that, but Lulu reminded her that it was Anya who opened the portal and teleported Ednet to where they were then. Now that she said it like that, Anya couldn't really deny it because that's what she did back then. Now, a million things are running through her little mind as she wonders what to do. After all, Lulu is her first friend, and she doesn't want to fight her. So she did what any sane person would do. She apologized to Lulu, promising to never do that again. Unfortunately for her, Lulu's still pretty sore about it, refusing to talk to Anya, so the latter asked what she could do for Lulu to forgive her. But Lulu was determined not to forgive her, as she told Anya that she should think long and hard about what to do about it next time. Anya's face drooped after she heard that, but she told Lulu that she'd find a way to make the latter feel better next time. Their conversation wrapped up when Jarrell called her over, saying it was time for them to go. As she approached her guild member, Anya plopped to the floor and told the older man that her life was ruined by Jarrell just letting her be and, at the same time, saying that she should get up. Lol, Anya, being a drama queen, is such a mood. Jarrell glanced at Aaron's table, wondering if it really had been a year and a half since they last saw Aaron. Looking at him now, it seems that the rumors about Aaron becoming a swordmaster are true after all, which is quite a feat to accomplish in such a short time. Just how unreal is this kid? We know that's right because that's our homie, Aaron. Later that afternoon, Aaron went back to the park to meditate, and this time he had a few thoughts to sort out. But hey, at least he no longer cowers in fear while standing face to face with Ednet, which felt good. However, it also made him realize something else. And it's the fact that if he wants to accomplish his goals, he still has a lot of growing to do. As he thought about this, Aaron manifested his sword and started swinging it around and practicing by himself. He thought about how he needed to do his best to make sure that his dreams didn't just stay as they were, swinging his sword in the air at every thought. Once he had enough, Aaron lowered his blade and stood still, panting heavily at the sudden sword exercises he had just done. Then there's also Ilya, who stood staring at the moon later that night. She's most probably thinking about the events that happened that day. It looks like the pair's got a lot of thinking to do. We just hope they sort it out before the expedition starts. Before you knew it, the day of the expedition came a few days later, when the troops from the different kingdoms gathered together. Almira began to explain that there were 2 separate entrances to the dungeon that they would be exploring, which is why they would split their party into 2 groups and raid both sides at the same time. Expedition Team 1 will consist of Palenque, Rabat, and the Kalven Knights, led by Perry Martins, who is their designated commander in charge. So that leaves them with the Black Knights from Arvilius as Team 2, with Evenet Crescentia as their commander. After Almira's announcement, some of the soldiers started whispering among themselves, wondering why Verut had such a distraught look on his face when the other guy asked if he didn't know what happened back then. Well, it looks like he didn't, because he wouldn't be asking in the first place if he did, right? Anyway, it happened 4 days ago when a meeting was held to decide who would be the commander of each team. Naturally, Evenet tried to claim the position, but Verux immediately opposed her, leading to an argument that ended up becoming a duel. In the end, Verux suffered a miserable defeat at the hands of the Black Knight's captain. Since it was Evenet's overwhelming victory, the difference between their strengths was far too much. Thank God for Evenet for putting these ambitious men in their places. Back to the present, Perry could only blame Verux for getting humbled like that, and his acting out right now just proved Evenet's point. But more important than that, Perry thinks it's close to impossible to compete with the Black Knights, at least while Evenet's in the picture, so he makes a mental note to make his group stand out among Kalven and Palenque. Judging from Vero's condition right now, Perry thought that he didn't need to worry about Palenque much, and if anything, it's those 2 mercenaries from Kalven he's worried about, aka our very own Aaron and Ilya. The unsuspecting pair were minding their own business, listening to their furry friend promise them that she's got their backs. And I think Perry should also be threatened by Lulu, if we're being honest here. Soon enough, the 2 groups proceeded to their designated positions, where most of the troops stood waiting at the front of dungeon entrance A. Almira started to tremble, asking no one in particular if it was really time for them to go. But Sir Gregory patted her, trying to calm her nerves as he reminded the vice captain that she couldn't afford to look nervous in front of the crew. Finally, Perry signaled for everyone in Team 1 to move in, and no sooner had he stepped into the tunnel than he suddenly found himself alone, completely surrounded by darkness. He turned around, trying to see through, but he was met with nothing but silence. He let out a chuckle, wondering aloud if this was a trial. He already knew that this expedition wouldn't be a common one, but he never thought that it would turn out to be an ancient temple. So here's the thing about trials. These unexplainable phenomena are said to have occurred in ancient temples, wherein those who dare to enter must face a trial given by the gods. But there's a little trick to this. What you need to do when you find yourself surrounded by darkness is not be swayed by the endless amount of doubt and anxiety that overwhelms you. You simply walk on your own path confidently, which is exactly what Perry did. It seems pretty easy enough to do, but those with anxious minds will be devoured by darkness, quickly lose their way, and destroy themselves in the end. With this in mind, Rabat's court mage thought that they'd have a lot of stragglers on the get-go. Meanwhile, somewhere else in the dungeon, Vero stood on guard, wondering if this was a divine trial. He got his answer, and not a second later when he looked down and saw his bloodied armor standing among the corpses of his men. Suddenly, a soldier started running toward him with his sword raised, so Veroix immediately went on defense, slicing his opponent, who dissipated in the air. He tells himself to snap out of it, that this is just an illusion, then proceeds to walk forward, knowing full well that he needs to not get swayed by the darkness. Veroix continues to remind himself to stand firm and move forward, and soon enough, he sees the light at the end of the tunnel. He approached it, thinking it must be the exit, and as he walked over to the other side, he saw Perry standing just a few feet away from him. He was relieved to see Rabat's mage and asked the former if he was the second one to emerge from the tunnel when he suddenly heard another voice proclaiming that another person had made it out. The swordmaster instantly turned in the direction of the voice, wondering if somebody else had gotten out before him. Of course, it's Lulu and Ilya, with our furry friend not bothering to conceal her disappointment since it's not Aaron who got out. Wait, Aaron's not out yet. Verux was surprised to see Ilya Lindsay get out ahead of him, wondering how she managed to do that. Perry already knew what the swordmaster was thinking, seeing Vera's reaction while looking at Ilya. Admittedly, The mage is also surprised because no one expected that the first person to make it through the trial would be Ilya Lindsay, the person with the most muddled mind right now. Ha, that's what you thought. Thankfully, Ilya's too pretty to care what they were thinking as she stroked and told Lulu that Aaron would emerge soon. It was still vivid in Perry's memory how, during the banquet, Ilya was completely snubbed by Ednet. From the looks of it, the silver-haired beauty seemed shaken back then, too, so it made him wonder if she suddenly had a change of heart. Soon enough, more and more people emerged from the tunnel, although there were still more who hadn't come out. Almira and Sir Gregory also made it out, with the former commenting that not even half of their troops had emerged yet, and the older man only hummed in reply. In his mind, he already knew that they would suffer losses, but he didn't expect a stark difference in numbers between the Kalven Knights and the other kingdoms. But the most surprising thing for him out of all of this is that Irene Pereira still hasn't come out yet. Sir Gregory thought for sure that he'd be the first one to overcome the trial. From the side, Perry called out to him as the mage told him that they waited long enough and couldn't do so any longer because they needed to keep moving. Furthermore, the former also said that it's a trial by a merciful god, so those stuck in the darkness won't suffer any serious injuries. Sir Gregory was convinced and agreed that they couldn't delay the expedition any further when a third voice chimed in the conversation and told them that they should wait a little more. Perry turned to look and saw that Ilya had approached them. This time, it was Veru who spoke and asked what she meant by that. The silver-haired swordsman simply stated that they should trust their comrades and wait for them a little longer. After all, isn't the very essence of the trial to have unwavering faith and conviction that can overcome doubts, anxiety, and mistrust? Take it to church, girl. Now that she voiced it out, even Almira and Sir Gregory seemed to agree with what Ilya said. What's more, Ilya also believed that you shouldn't only trust yourself, but you also have to extend that belief toward others as well. Although she made a good point, Perry was about to stress how they couldn't wait any longer when the men started chattering at the entrance, exclaiming that someone was about to come out. Finally, it was our boy, Aaron, who emerged from the darkness, holding his glowing sword right in front of him. He apologized for coming out late, explaining that he took a little longer than expected because there were other things he had to deal with. Right behind our hero's back are none other than the remaining soldiers from the three groups, much to Perry's shock as all of them came out unscathed. How many of you are willing to bet that Aaron actually saved these men? But let's take it back to 2 hours ago, a random night from we don't know which faction started panicking upon being engulfed by darkness. He tried to call out to the void, asking if there was anyone out there, completely unaware that a dark liquid was starting to pool on his feet. He kept walking until, eventually, he slipped into this dark liquid that started to overtake him. This poor soldier started to run, shouting for help and announcing his location as he went, but to no success. Suddenly, he saw a golden light shimmering from a distance, which he quickly crawled into, thinking that he'd finally been safe. The closer he moved to the light, the more he felt a strange sensation overcome him as he gradually regained his composure and felt more at peace. This light emanates warmth and comfort, making him wonder just what it was. Soon enough, he sees Aaron crouching in front of him, his golden sword shining as our hero extends his hand to the fallen soldier. And that's exactly how the same soldier relayed the story to Sir Gregory and Almira, with the vice captain feeling so amazed that Aaron managed to intervene during a divine trial. Her captain shushed her, saying she was too loud, which made Almira regain her composure. Almira quickly apologized, but Sir Gregory was no longer paying any attention to her. He already had his eyes trained on Aaron, thinking about how he had never heard of a human intervening during a divine trial, which just goes to show that our hero is special. On the other hand, we have Aaron, who finally reunites with Lulu and Ilya, apologizing for making them wait. Both of them didn't mind, with Lulu adding that she's okay with it as long as he's safe. But back to Sir Gregory's internal monologue. The captain of the Kalven Knights mulls over Aaron's aura that lights up its surroundings. It was an energy Sir Gregory had never felt from another swordmaster before. Then, on the other side, Sir Gregory sees Perry gritting his teeth while staring at Aaron. Rebat's mage is obviously annoyed because right now, a much younger person accomplishing such a feat was a jab to his ego as the team's commander. Perry can be annoyed all he wants, but there's no denying that what Aaron accomplished was a great feat, and that the center of the expedition right now is our very own hero, Irene Pereira, period. Before they made an even bigger deal out of this, Perry turned and told everyone to get it together since they would be resuming the expedition. They all did as he instructed, with Vera reminding his men to keep their eyes peeled since they never knew what might pop out next. Team 1's expedition progressed, and it didn't take long before the group encountered their first wave of monsters. Fortunately, they were able to fight it off squarely with Perry on the front lines. And just when they'd subdued the first wave of monsters, a large number of golems appeared at the front, so each faction decided to get into formation to fight them better. Perry was the first to lead the attack, ordering the troops to focus their attacks on the front line while he and the other mages used fire magic to hold the monsters off. With a snap of his finger, green orbs started flying and darting straight to the golems' eyes, leaving them crumbling to pieces. Meanwhile, Verev manifests his mana around his body before dashing straight to the golems and obliterating them with his lance. He tells the others to destroy the red cores and the golems' heads to crush them, when, finally, it's our boy Aaron's time to shine. With one fell swoop, he sliced a golem in half, while Ilya let the monster have it with her attack combo of slashes. Before the golems realized what happened to them, they were all left crumbling to pieces as Team 1 emerged as the victor. Perry quickly assesses the aftermath of the battle, asking if everyone is all right. Fortunately, they suffered no casualties since everyone was safe. Since they were all good, Perry led the team to continue forward until they reached a narrow hallway, empty as a ghost town. There was a gust of wind blowing from somewhere, just as Perry thought that they had managed to survive 5 battles so far. Things are going pretty smoothly, and yet what is this unsettling feeling Rebat's mage is experiencing right now? He took a step forward and then stopped because he suddenly felt chills run up his whole body. The very reason for that lies in front of him as piles and piles of skeletons, many of which are stacked up together to make pillars, welcome their sights just as violet and hazy light illuminate this godforsaken area. Now that they've seen what those are, Almira could only gasp in horror, and even Sir Gregory was rattled seeing what lies before them. Soon, the rest of the knights started murmuring, wondering what happened in this place and if those were really human skeletons. Aaron, Ilya, and Lulu were already on guard despite also being shocked at seeing something so horrendous when finally, some of the guards caved into fear. They started shaking, overcome with terror, as they told each other that they needed to leave the place right this instant. Verev shouted at them, telling them not to give in to their fears, and was about to scold them to not let their anxiety get the best of them when a cold, menacing laugh echoed through the halls that shut them all up as a red light suddenly appeared, instantly turning into a portal where fear and malice oozed out. There was a howling voice followed by a pair of hands gripping the portal's edge while a pair of sinister red eyes peeked through. The voice spoke again, amused that their group would voluntarily crawl into his territory, making it a lot easier for him. But Perry and the others stood frozen at what they were witnessing then. The figure finally emerged wearing a jester's outfit. Vera could only stare in horror, refusing to believe what was happening in front of him, while Aaron could only glare at it, whatever it was. The unholy figure spoke again and told them that, as a reward, he'd give them the gift of death, cackling as he loomed over the whole troop. Wait a minute, are my eyes deceiving me, or is that the whole demon past Aaron was fighting from before?